The following presentation was recorded live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the 22nd Annual International Association of Square Dance Callers. This is tape number 12, Successful Choreography, Advanced and Challenge.
This is the Successful Choreography, which I can't say too well, panel for Advanced and Challenge. On my left is Jack Borgstrom from Sweden, and Tim Crawford will be joining us shortly. He's from Ontario. He's not coming from Ontario, but he's here. And I'm Mike Jacobs from Herndon, Virginia. What we thought we would do is actually divide into three different segments of material here, since we're covering both advanced and challenge choreography. Jack is initially going to take a look at adding some positioning and different uses of several different calls in choreographic application, looking at some advanced calls from some different positions, maybe some places you don't use it, with kind of a slant and eye towards the different positioning that is used overseas in Germany, Sweden, and so forth. Tim then will be talking about adding a certain amount of entertainment flair to advanced choreography, and the last segment I'll be talking about actually the challenge aspect, and that is, as since we're in a combined advanced and challenge choreographic session here, what I'm going to try to do is look at C1 teaching orders and C1 teaching and teaching classes and handouts and things along that line. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Jack Borgstrom.
All right, thank you. Well, when I first got the question to be on the panel here, I was hesitating, and I thought, what can I tell you out there that you don't already know? Well, then I talked to Mike, and he said, well, just tell them what you do in Sweden, how you do it there. So I thought, yes, I can do that. So I'm going to show you some of the choreography I use back home on advanced, A1, and A2. Well, when I decided to be one of the speakers here, I started to hear. Don't you hear? Okay. When I decided to be one of the speakers, I started to ask dancers what they think a caller when he's successful or when he is creative with his choreography. And I got several different answers. Some of the answers were from the dancers, when you get to think, was one of them. When you learn a new call was another one. When squares are breaking down, maybe that's too creative. But the most common one was when we learn something new about our level. I think that's, in Sweden, the dancers they don't want a new call. They want to learn something new about the calls on their level that they already know. So something new about the advanced A1 calls or something new about the A2 calls. So that's what I'm going to talk about here, to be successful with your choreography at the level, advanced A1 and A2. Then I asked the callers too, some callers in Sweden, when do you think a caller is creative or successful with his creativity? And they couldn't give an answer immediately. They had to have some, examples. So I gave them Turn and Deal from Lefty Ocean Waves, Spin the Windmill from Funny Diamonds, Motivate from position where you have had the centers counter-rotate, those formations. Some of the callers said, that's not creative. Nothing is creative. That's normal dancing. And some said, it's all creative. It's all very, very creative. I couldn't do that in my class. So what it comes down to is, it's wherever you are, it's going to be different. You have to look at the dancers and find your, what I call, calls that will test the level testers or level finders. And at the same time, you can be creative. And I usually, in Sweden, use at the A1 level, Turn and Deal for a level tester, and at the same time to be creative. And to be successful with it, I think you have to give the dancers, I think you got two tools. One is hints to the dancers, or words that make them go the right way, and body flow. If you use those two, you're going to be successful with your choreography. And I would like to have a square up, and I'm going to do something with Turn and Deal. Can we have a square, please? Right, thank you. Well, I think the most common with turn and deal is to do it from a right-handed two-face line. I think almost all dancers can make that one. So when I'm going to start to find the level, to find the skills of the dancers, I start with a left-handed two-face line, okay? So heads wheel through. Veer left, California twirl. Couple circulate, just to get the California twirl out of our body. Okay, from here now, I'm going to do a turn and deal. Wait. To make the dancers to make them go through with this, I give them a hint. I give them, be careful now, it's going to be a right shoulder pass. Okay, turn and deal. And usually that helps and that will make them make it, okay? Trade by. Touch a quarter. Centers trade. Quarter through. Crossover circulate. Left quarter through. Okay. B would be to do it from a left-handed wave. And from here, I have to give them some more hints. Okay, girls, it's going to be a right shoulder pass. The boys, follow the girl beside you. You're going to hold her in the opposite hand. Now left, it's going to be a right. Turn and deal. That is perfect. Boys run around the girls. Pints the ocean. Take a peek in your own wave and trade the wave. C would be doing it from here. Okay, now it's getting really difficult. Usually I get through with the left-handed two-face line and left-handed parallel ocean waves in Sweden. Here's when usually the problem starts. The hints are still the same, but you have to say work towards the center of your own wave. Okay? So the boy's going to meet right shoulder, the girls follow the boy, opposite hand, right hand, to the centers of your own wave, turn and deal. Okay, usually I get the dancer's attention at this point in Sweden. And if I don't, I can put roll in the end of it. Walk and dodge. Partner trade, I won't do that now. Okay, that's how I work it. And somewhere along the line, in some groups, you're going to find that maybe you just get to A, and then you have to start workshopping. In some groups, you get all the way down to C. And then you're getting worried, what am I going to do now? Hopefully, you have some material on other calls that you can use. Okay. At A2, I work with spin the windmill as a level tester. And pints the ocean, if you will. Swing through. Should I have the handouts now, maybe, so they can follow? Okay. Boy run around the girl. Okay. 3/4 tag the line. This is where I start with spin the windmill. Okay, spin the windmill right. And then I tell the boys, swing, slip, catch 3/4. Spin the windmill right because the girls are always right. Yeah? Okay, that's A. B would be bend the line, pints the ocean, boys walk and dodge, boys run around the girls, girls hinge, boys pints through. Okay, and do it from here. Wait, spin the windmill ahead. Boys, remember to go 2 positions. Girls do a swing, slip, and catch 3/4. And we have a 3-1 line. Girls in the middle, boys on the end. Good. Girls walk and dodge. Everybody partner trade. Pints the ocean. Quarter through. Okay. Explode the wave. Explode the line. Centers trade. Ends run around the centers. Pints through. Wheel and deal and spread. And here's really I think the most difficult position from here. Do is spin the windmill. We're going to do it ahead. Okay, boys, you're going to step 2 away. Wait a minute, don't do it yet. This is what I tell the dancer before I do it. And here I do a sex arrangement. So it's easier for the dancers to see what I'm doing. So boys, you are going to step to 8. Do that, okay? Girls, you're going to circulate 2 positions all the way to the other end. 1 pass through and then all the way trade. Boys, you do the swing and the slip and the cast off 3. And here we have something called a funny T-bone, I think. Or, yeah. And this is really challenging for the dancers because they are not ending up with, the girls are not ending up holding on to something. They will, usually they stop with the boys. You know, they stop and want to have a handhold. Okay? Boys walk and dodge. Girls start a split square through 4. Trade by. Touch a quarter. Then with I'm finished here. Thank you, square. Okay. This spin the windmill is, I think, is a real fun call to call. You can do a lot with it, and you can break it down. You can have the centers go 1.5 or 2.5, and you can have the centers, you know, breaking the call down. But and the hints for the dancers here, they have a problem. You can give them the hints, and they hopefully will make it through. That's a tool you should use, and you have to use it at the right time. You know, the timing is very important there. If the dancers will do it without the hints, you know, you can try without giving them the hints. Then you can go right on to the next step in your creative formation list. When you're calling the creative things, sometimes, I think all the time when you're calling creative, to be successful with your creativity, you must think on yourself as a salesman. You have a product, you're going to sell it, you have to talk for it in a way so they will buy it. And that's the hints are there, the body flow are there, and use those tools to make it all the way. So it's all presentation and body flow. Well, I'm going through my notes here. Well, I think this creativity is good, but you have to be careful. I want to place a warning. When you're getting creative, it's really easy to be a chess player, to be too mathematic. You have to still have the body flow. The dancers does not want to stand there and listen to cues and watch other people dance. It's very important to. The first time you can't all get all the squares to make it, maybe when you're getting creative. But the second time or the third time, you have to have everybody with you. Otherwise, maybe you should drop it. Okay? But the flow and the hints, I think, is very important. Well, I have written a thing here, what I think is to be a creative caller and a successful creative caller, what it means, what that is for me. To be a creative caller is to call something the dancers haven't seen or done before, or think they haven't seen or done before because of the way it's called. And to call it so the dancers realize they've done it, but can't believe they made it. Thank you.
Jack was initially reluctant about participating in the program here because of giving an input in an activity that's had such a long history on this continent and such a short history there. Also in explaining himself in a language that's not his native tongue, and I think Jack did an exceptional job in showing that square dancing is really one language. Since Mr. Crawford hasn't joined us yet, actually Tim is busy making another presentation at another committee meeting right now because he's had 2 conflicts. So what I'd like to try to do is to go over some stuff I have for the challenge list. First off, Jack has a handout over what he just dealt with the choreography for the turn and deal and the spin the windmill. Is that correct? Yeah. I have a whole series of handouts here that owe some explanation. Basically, what I approached things in doing here was that since we're a mixed meeting of both advanced and challenge, that perhaps looking at how to teach C1 would be a good subject material and matter. What I did was that first off, I printed up my C1 teaching order and some information on why things were in different places and what went behind the ideas of it. Secondly, I printed up a form and a sample dance that occurred. The form is the problem that we many times have is that we go to places where we see a group that's in process of learning C1, and it's not the teaching order that we utilize. And so the problem is always learning to adjust and adapt to those people. Or even if you don't really do a lot of C1 calling and you go to a place and you're asked to do a star tip of a half level. And the problem is always trying to feel your way through somebody else's order. And so what I did was I created a document where it's organized by formations and concepts and so forth. In other words, there's a category saying concepts, category saying a box, a category saying a chain through, three-quarter tag, so forth. And what you do is you translate their list, whether it's alphabetical order or event-oriented, and then fill it in that way. So it's not a case of looking down some stranger's alphabetical order or some stranger's progression, but rather a list you've just created for yourself where you can look, okay, I'm in a three-quarter tag setup, here's the 5 calls that I can choose to call from. Or we're a box, I can look at that and say, as opposed to looking at 30 calls, I can look at 4 and make a choice. And what it does is it cuts down the search time so that you can effectively call to the regular tempo of the music. And so that's a form I created there, and also a dance sample of somebody else's list that I had to work off of and how I filled it out. What I also have here is a set of handouts I use for C1. Now, when I teach C1, part of what occurs is that it's not giving dancers homework, but it's giving dancers information. An informed dancer is your best bet of actually learning a particular level. Now, the way you inform him, of course, is in the course of lecture. That's how you do the dance and how you do the teaching. But also giving them some kind of resource to be able to go back and look at something on paper to figure out what they've done. Now, remember that the basic education approach that we've discovered now in general education theory is that there's 3 different styles of learning styles. There are people that learn visually, there's people that learn auditorily, and there are people that learn tactile. And there are all kinds of different combinations in their strengths. Usually what happens is that you have one primary learning style, you have a secondary style that affects the primary, and then there's one style you have no connection with whatsoever. For instance, I'm a tactile learner. I've learned across the years how to get into situations that are primary, a situation where I have to learn to listen or learn to read a lot, and I adapt them into my tactile senses. So successful learners learn to adapt their style across the board. What we've got to do with square dance teaching is to make sure that we teach all of the people on the floor and not just the people that learn like us. What happens in modern educational teaching theory is that they've discovered that the people that are of one learning style are primarily the teachers. And 2/3 of the people that are out there trying to learn from you are of the other learning style that you don't understand. So you have to adjust and understand the fact that you may have to teach in a way, in a form, that you don't understand why anybody learns that way, but they'll learn that way if you use that style. Now, what I like to do is I would like to bring a square of dancers up, but I need them acquainted with the C1 list. So if I can get a square of C1 dancers, I want to show you a couple things here that I've noticed. Are we done? All the heads pass the ocean. Extend the tag. Now, in the course of teaching tally-ho, we never really have a problem with the walkthrough. It's done slowly and effectively, and we usually get the dancers all the way through it. Everybody do half of an all-night circulate if you're not acquainted with tally-ho. Now, the wave dancers hinge and do half of a box circulate while the outsides trade. And the centers cast three-quarters, the ends do the hourglass circulate up to the end, and we have no problem with the walkthrough. That went fine. Boys run right. Bend the line. Pass the ocean. Now, of course, now nobody out here is going to make a mistake, so we're not going to see what we normally see on the floor. Tally-ho, please. Boys run right. I'm going to get out here in a way. Bend the line. Pass the ocean. Now, what do you see, though, when reality sets in? When you're trying to dance when you're trying to call tally-ho and you see dancers on the floor trying to attempt to dance it. Let's do the half circulate. The outsides go ahead and do the trade. The centers, they hinge, but many times what you see is this body turning the extra quarter. And now they're aimed at the wrong person to try to go left 3/4 with. And bodies start flying everywhere. Okay? What's the second thing do you see? The second thing you normally see is this girl here not turning the corner. She stands here. All right? Now, what occurs? Well, first off, this person's trying to cast with the wrong person. Secondly, this girl has no idea where to move. Now, why is it occurring? Let's go back to the wave that you just came from, please. The whole wave? You go back where you came. Interesting. We're talking about the people that are working in this activity quite a bit. We expect dancers many times to go right back where they just came from. They don't remember where they were. They have no inherent memory of it. They don't approach it the way we approach it. And once we learn to understand that, we may have a clue at trying to teach them. Now, what occurs on the tally-ho here, you notice that the people that are facing out, they do the half circulate and they trade with each other. And they do that right away and very effectively. Well, the problem comes is when you start varying the positions for the different people is that the action of this person coming to the center and doing the hinge feels very similar to the trade they just do on the outside. That's why they overturn. They don't recognize that they're in a different place. They don't understand that coming into the center is supposed to be a different feel than what occurs on the outside. We may teach it the first 5 or 6 times with this combination of people doing the tally-ho this way. Suddenly we vary it and approach it from a different place, and that person that was out here is now coming into the middle. His feel is want to do the same action he did on the outside because he's doing a call with the same name. And what we've got to do is instruct them that it's going to feel different when we come at it from a different angle. What I had to do was, let's go ahead and do the half circulate. Outsides do the trade. I had to remind the centers after the hinge, if they would let go of their hands before they attempt to do the half a split circulate, suddenly this girl is no longer yanking on this guy when she turns the corner. And that's what's helping to throw him over to make it feel like the trade on the outside. He's got a better chance of going straight ahead. This girl, when she turns the corner, has no option about anywhere to go. So what we have to do is accent that this spot needs to be turned, that we need to move this body to this point, so now there's no choice but to go to the right place. Finish the tally-ho, please. Now, all of that means analyzing why the people on the floor are making mistakes. And it's because the parts of the call feel similar. The tactile dancer is dancing by feel. So no matter how many times we lecture them about, well, can't you see your starting position? We're speaking Greek to that person. He doesn't recognize the difference between the two. Also, the person that is an auditory learner, unless we've got a clue that's a verbal clue for him to learn effectively, to put his hat on, he's not going to pick it up either. So basically, we're talking Greek to do different sections of people when we're going with a visual approach to things. So we have to assault it from all kinds of different directions. Let's look at this. Everybody do a single hinge. Now, on the call percolate, the problem always comes from ocean waves. Because we do the first circulate once and a half, and then we know that the center dancers do a hinge and cross and the outside dancers do a turn through, but the dancers don't seem to know that. The dancers, either the wrong dancers are trying to do the turn through, the wrong dancers are trying to do the hinge and cross, and why? It's because it's feeling the same. Let's do an all-eight circulate once. Okay? Now comes the half of the all-eight circulate. Well, once again now, you know, the walkthrough is going fine. Yeah, we can see that there are many waves on the outside and a wave across the middle. Center wave dancers hinge and cross while the girls do the turn through here. Okay? Step and slide. Boys roll right to a wave. But they don't dance the call like they dance the walkthrough. And what happens after the first all-eight circulate 1.5? Well, the very fine, standardized formation that we have here goes to pieces. It starts to become this one large circle action, and they don't see any difference between the two aspects. Do your percolate all at once. All-eight circulate 1.5. Now, who does what? Now, they were successful, but there was a reason why they were successful. Step and slide. Girls roll right to a wave. In roll circulate. The reason they were successful is because they broke the pattern for a second. They stopped and hesitated after the first circulate. They eliminated the circular nature of it so they could start to tell who were the in-facers and who were the out-facers. Now, there's another thing that goes on to reason why the dancers are confused on the issue. Let's go ahead and do the first circulate. Let's do the half circulate. Now, what happens? These dancers are doing an arm turn a quarter for the hinge and cross. Those dancers are doing a right arm turn a half for the turn through, but both the quarter turn and the half turn start the same way. The reason the dancers get confused is because the call's blending. And unless we can find some way to break it up for them, they can't tell the difference between the parts. So if we can tell them, okay, let's stop after the first circuit and evaluate whether you're facing in or facing out. Facing out will make you do the turn through after the first circulate. Facing in will make you do the hinge and cross after the first circulate. This only applies to the ocean waves, folks. Don't go around quoting everything else. But this is the place where we normally call the majority of the time, standard applications. So let's try looking at where we can solve the problem for most of the dancers most of the time. If we tell them that after they were facing in after the first circulate that they're going to do the hinge and cross, that gives them a shot at evaluating what they're going to do and not letting the similarity between this hinge and that trade confuse the two sets of people. Boys do the trade and turn it and step through, girls the hinge and cross. And we succeeded. Now, step and slide, please. Girls trade. Actually, the formations that we think are more exotic at percolate are actually easier to function. If we do a percolate from an H-chain through formation, the people that are facing into the middle are going into the middle to do the center's part. They're already aimed at the correct spot. Fellows, you're facing out, you're coming out to do the outside's part. It goes very quickly and effectively. In fact, I've changed my teaching style on percolate. This is now the first formation I teach it from, as opposed to ocean waves, because I found that the success ratio was far better here, and I could get the principle of the call down, and then I treated the ocean wave percolate as the more exotic formation. Yeah, Keith.
Mike, I'd be interested in hearing your discussion. You talked before about breaking it after the first circulate and telling those people facing in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, girls. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Why do you choose to talk to them after breaking the first circulate rather than tell them that you're facing out to start? You're going to do the hinge.
Girls, step two away with the guys. The problem is that circulates time out differently. People that are facing in have a very short distance to walk across the square. People that are facing out, particularly the end facing out, has such a long way to go. The circulate doesn't time well. And what happens is that as we add the half circulate to it, there comes an even greater timing problem as far as people performing. So what we've done is that we've gotten them so far away from their starting point to recognize where they got to make a decision, they've lost any advantage they got. Whereas where I'm having them make the decision is right before they need to make the decision. Okay, let's do the first all-day circulate. Notice how long this guy takes to get to the other side of the square. Now, if I have them decide here, it's very quickly, you're aimed at the spot where you're facing out, you're going to do the outside's part. It reminds it, as opposed to working a contradiction as a way of defining itself. If I got to say, to do the center's part, you got to be facing out, doesn't work as well as saying, after the first circulate, if you're facing out, do the outside's part. Then suddenly you're very consistent down the line. If you're facing in after the first circulate, you're going to do the inside's part. And so suddenly it allows them to use this first circulate to verify where they are, and it becomes then an identification spot for themselves as well. So that's why I do it after the first circulate. And it really starts to hold the formation together. People suddenly don't start rushing the call, and that's what occurs time and again on the percolate. We see here we've been maintaining the ocean wave integrity very well, but as you know by seeing the call done, it starts to merge into one big thar circle, and it suddenly becomes unidentifiable as to what part you're going to do. So it's really gotten to the point where I start to believe that the ocean wave is probably the more exotic position and hard position to do the percolate than any of the other formations. Let's look at this. Explode the wave, please. Partner trade. Pass through. It's easier from the line spacing out. If we do the percolate from here, should be a really exotic formation. But in reality, the centers are staying in the center of the circulate. They end up doing the center's part. The ends are the ends of the circulate. They end up doing the ends part. It really becomes a no-brainer, even though the formation they end up in is a little more exotic. Let's do the percolate. Girls, we do all circulate once. Now the half, girls the hinge and cross, boys to turn through. Notice that we end up T-boned, and the only thing I really do from this setup, other than set up the same sex locations for everything, is say, well, it's going to end T-bone, and just remind them that the formation is not going to have quite the same feel at the conclusion that it normally has. But I find that kind of formation that we on the surface think is very exotic and hard can actually be easier than the formation we think is the most standard one and the one we always try to teach it from first. And so actually the problems come from the ocean wave, which we think is our biggest friend on teaching the call. Both these scenarios, the tally ho and the percolate, it's a matter of looking at the dancers and trying to understand how they learn, and then trying to cater even to learning styles you may not understand, that there are ways to teach them effectively. Take a break, guys. Yeah. What I was referring to is I have a whole set of handouts on the different things that I just talked about on the C1 class order and a number of other things. There's a couple of things that I have learned that may have some controversy to them as far as this teaching order. For one thing, I teach Scoot and Plenty before I teach Scoot and Little. There's a number of reasons I made that decision. I initially always took that logical building block format of teaching Step and Fold, and then teaching Scoot and Little, and then teaching Scoot and Plenty. And that's fine for the people that think conceptually on the floor. But 2/3 of the people you teach don't think that way. So using building blocks is not going to make any sense to people that don't understand building blocks as a format. Scoot and Little is a different issue than Step and Fold, and that's a different issue from Scoot and Plenty. There are calls that have names, and for some people, each spot is a different call for them. My mother is a C1 dancer. My mother, well, in one shape or form. No, my mother's a very good C1 dancer, but when she dances everything in a concept, Phantom and so forth, well, we should be able to teach them the principle of Phantom and having them apply it everywhere. Wrong. My mother has a vocabulary of 80, 90 calls that always start with the word Phantom. Each one's a different event for her. She's got to learn where she needs to go, how she needs to do it, and how she needs to handle it. And so there's no one overriding factor for her to do. She is successful out on the floor. She functions out on the floor. But her learning style has nothing to do with a conceptual approach to teaching or to dancing. So what we got to do to be able to function at teaching all these different people is learn how they learn and how we can effectively teach them. So when we're teaching somebody that needs an example of each type, they need to go through each type to understand that we need to expose them to a whole bunch of different calls as Phantom, and not just one or two calls and, well, you've got the concept, you can apply it anywhere. But people that think conceptually, yes. 2/3 of your dancers, no. You've got to find another method of showing them where to go, how it feels, and how to learn. And they can adapt their learning styles once you give them some methodologies of learning and approaching all those different things. So what I've done with Scoot and Plenty is that historically, when we originally developed the challenge list, Scoot and Plenty was on the list and Scoot and Little was on the C2 list. Scoot and Little became the first call that we could take. You did a C1 weekend and you wanted to drop some material down from some different lists, so you used Scoot and Little because it was an easy teach. You could stop the dancers from doing Scoot and Plenty, and there you had Scoot and Little, and you introduced the name. We introduced the name to experienced dancers, and from somewhere then we made the leap that dancers being introduced to the level could learn it quickly. And we found out that that's not true. Scoot and Little is a hard teach. When I teach Scoot and Plenty early in the list and Scoot and Little very late in the list, I get an easy teach because I can stop the process. I can take the little call out of the big call very easily. It's very hard to make building blocks to go all the way up to the end. But when I use it the other way around, I still have to fight the battle on Scoot and Plenty no matter where I do it. If I do it early and then take the Scoot and Little out of it, I at least only have to fight one battle instead of two. So historically, that was very effective. I found it was effective on the floor as well. So there may be some things that are in different orders. For instance, I have cross castback occurring at the very end. I find it not a very useful choreographic tool. It will set up inverted lines very quickly, and you can effectively use that. But I teach past the axle very early. It's something that I refer to very casually as we do the teach, but basically I show people how to go over to the end without confusing them with another piece of terminology. They learn the dance pattern, and then later on at the very end of lessons, then I say, oh, by the way, this is a call part, and we can call this cross-cast back and do that here. We've done this all the time in this other call. I have 20 weeks or more of successful behavior in dancing past the axle that when I finally introduce cross-cast back, it's a piece of cake. What do I have at the end of my teaching order? At the end of my teaching order is mostly stuff. Number one, I believe that there's nothing that replaces the experience out on the dance floor, so that we can keep keep people in lessons all we want, but eventually they have to go out and mix around in public. Now, we know that when we teach beginners and so forth, there's always an adjustment pattern, that once they leave mainstream lessons, they get out to the real floor and they have problems adjusting to the real life timing, that it's called much faster and danced much faster than what they experienced in lesson groups. Doesn't matter whether they're beginner mainstream dancers or beginning challenge dancers, there is that adjustment factor. So somewhere along the line, I believe you should start trying your wings out. Now, we have so many festivals where there is available dancing or introduction to the level, and I encourage people towards the end of their lessons to take a shot at mixing in for a tip or two. Don't go into that hall. You're not really prepared for it and stay there the whole time. But somewhere along the way, you can sample and try out the level a little bit. So I organized the list so that the last few teaches are dealing with calls that you can pretty much start to figure out. Let's talk about challenge dancers. They have a large vocabulary. They have lots of different words in their terminology now. So suddenly a dancer that understands how to do Dixie style to a wave and understands the principle of split square through and split square chain through, introducing them to the concept of split Dixie style to a wave isn't that radical a departure. So now it's a matter of a minor adjustment. People that have danced grand quarter through and grand three-quarter through and grand swing through and have danced follow your neighbor and spread, it doesn't take a doctorate to figure out grand follow your neighbor and spread. So why not leave these towards the last when we need the least amount of dance time? And the way I've organized this teaching order is to put the hardest material first, so that the dancers in lessons have the lesson environment for the longest amount of time on the most difficult calls. So it does mean that we're a bit overwhelming at first in teaching, but at the same time, and what I keep telling them is that you're going to have the longest amount of time to practice this call. So I don't necessarily look at frequency counts. I look at the difficulty of the material and how long we're going to need to function and be able to function on those things. What I also do is, across the list, is I spread the concepts out, so you don't deal with anything more than one concept a night. What I also do in the teaching order is that calls that start with the same consonant sound are not grouped together. So it's okay to have scoot back and swing through on the same night. Those are different sounds. But anything that started with SW or SC is put on different nights so that they don't get confused in what they're hearing. Remember, we've got people that learn by hearing as well as visual as well as tactile. So we got to cater and work with all those. The people that learn tactilely, we got to make sure that the calls that start from the same formation and have the same feel, like rotary spin and cross chain and row, are taught on widely separate nights. I don't really care what order you teach them in. I just want 10 weeks between them. So we got a chance for the dancers to learn one from the other. So basically, that's the approach I took with this teaching order. That's also what the handout is dealing with the justification. And that was some insight I had on perhaps learning how to deal with different learning styles out on the floor in learning C1. I think it has great application at Advanced as well. If you start looking to see how the pattern of the mistakes occur and what they might be confusing, too often on the microphone we look at the dancers and say, oh, they're a bad dancer, or they'll never learn C1, and we write them off. We got to become ecology-minded in square dancing. You know, everywhere else we're saving valuable resources. We're making sure that we don't waste paper. We're making sure that we don't waste aluminum cans. And we waste dancers who take a long time to get to this point, right and left. We write them off because we think they can't learn. Maybe we can't teach. And maybe that's what we need to work on. So, thank you. So maybe what we need to do is until Mr. Crawford decides to finally appear, is take a few minutes to see if there's any questions about what we talked about here, and then we can let Tim work when he gets here. These two, these are actually something I'm prouder of. These two handouts that I have here, one is a handout on rotates, the other is a handout on concentrics and actually cross-concentrics and checkpoints, since they're the same concept, or different reflections of it. What these two are, they're not just a handout of the definition of the call. You know, too often we hand the dancers a bunch of definitions, and we expect them to sit down and read it and interpret it. What I did was created graphs where somebody could chart the course, which means that the tactile learner has a chance of physically working across the sheet to figure out where they're at. And it ends up being one more step or process where somebody can learn by, as opposed to just reading a bunch of definitions.
advanced and challenge level is another level of square dancing that has a little bit more expertise involved with. The dancers are required to have a little more expertise. They are required to have a little more responsibility, perhaps, to the other 7 people. The choreography, the success of the choreography is more important than the success of choreography at mainstream. So, and because it causes a lot of stress, I do focus a little bit more on taking the stress out of it. But and it's not, I don't call necessarily any easier, but quite frequently it appears that way. And it's a trick. You can get them to do, some people can get people to do things that other people can't. And I'm convinced it's all in the delivery. I might be wrong about that, but for me, if I go to a club and if I tried to call that sequence and I was serious about it, I wanted them to get it, and I called it, I probably wouldn't have as much success than if I did it something else. The other night at my A2 club, we were dancing along, and we were working on trail off. And I love trail off. Trail off's a really hard call. We did it from the completed double pass through. We did it from columns. We did it from left-handed columns. Then we did it from two-face lines. Then we did it from waves. We did it from everywhere. Right hand, left hand. We did it just everywhere. And then we started working on mix in the next tip. So we were doing mixes, and we were doing mixes left, and we were doing mixes right. We were doing it from lines. We were doing it from everywhere. And then I started thinking that maybe we could put those 2 calls together. So I'd get them in a column, and I'd say, everybody do a trail off, and they'd do a trail off. And then I'd say, everybody mix, and they'd mix. And then I said, well, actually, let's do it this way. Let's all the leads do their part of a trail off, trailers step up, and then everybody mix. And so everybody did that, and I said, we should call that something. And all their wheels started turning. I said, what do you think we should call that? And they came up with trail mix, which I thought was great. But I already knew that they were going to come up with that name, because we were already laughing about it as we went along. So, but those types of things, I sit down. I actually do sit down, and as often as sometimes the things that I do are off the cuff, they are pre-thought. Usually, I think about them all the time, late at night. The only time in my life where things were kind of just bing, bang, bong was last year at CALLERLAB when I was the MC. I don't know what happened to me there. I have no idea, but it turned out good. I was very, 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 very lucky. Very lucky. Because 9 times out of 10, an attempt at humor fails. It usually fails, and it fails big time, as a matter of fact. So, and unless you know that... Thank you. And unless you have been down the road and had stuff, and we've all had an attempt at humor fail miserably at one time or another, and me, it fails constantly. But I take that failure and I just make sure that they know that I know that I failed at an attempt at humor, and I never ever go back to that. But sometimes things work out good, and those are the things that I take with me out on the road, and I talk and do silly things. But you have to be very careful with that, because dancers, especially at this level, they are demanding. There's no question, and they should be. If we're going to call this level, we should have a good working knowledge of it as well. But the stress that's involved with it, I take out of it, or I try to take out of it. So, I've only been assaulted a couple times by dancers, and I did not enjoy that each time. So I finally prohibited my mom from coming to the dances at all after that. So... And because, I'll be honest with you, some things I recognize about myself, my age, I'm 32, and I know that. And I know that people look at me, and I have a reputation that precedes me in a lot of cases. And generally speaking, my reputation has nothing to do with my calling ability, which is strange. It usually has to do with, the fact that I'm fun, or the fact that I'm silly or something like that. Whatever. I don't care why they remember me, as long as they just book me. I don't care why they remember me. But that reputation actually is a real nice buffer, because you can get people. I go out to Seattle, Washington, to Raleigh Wiens Group, probably the best dancers, arguably the best dancers I have ever called to in my life. And those people just ate me up. They were into choreography. And I'm into choreography too. I like to experiment with all kinds of things that I've never done before. And they made me do things that I have never done before. And I told them that they had made me do things that I had never done before, and it was a really nice thing going back and forth. But they were used to people who really went in there and spent a lot of time and effort with these people to show them some of the most interesting choreography in the world. And then they had me. And I would just went in there and did as much as I could possibly do. Every card I had ever written, some of the hardest stuff I had ever seen in my life. The big famous one, centers zoom. Or no, centers, the centers. From ready to do a double pass through, centers zoom. They're supposed to step ahead or pass through with each other. They knew that. Nobody knows that. Nobody knows that. I even wrote it wrong on my card on purpose. I would actually call what they were, most floors would dance. Not out there, but they knew that. And they did it correctly, which was great. The other one was a tally-ho from inverted lines. They knew who the centers were after that half a circulate. Nobody else in the country knew who the centers were. That was a whole weekend material workshop that they did in 3 seconds. And I knew I was in trouble. I knew I was in trouble at that point. But it's that type of thing. All of a sudden the stress actually switched back to me at that point. But because it's such an interesting level, and because it is a hobby to almost everybody that's in the advanced and challenge level. Those people who are still dancing at the advanced and challenge level and considered to be recreation are very few. Most of us, mostly at the challenge level, there are still a few recreational A1 dancers, I would imagine. And in Canada, we do separate A1 from A2. There is a definite separation. And I know that that's not the case in a lot of places. But so technically, theoretically, we should be able to expand the advanced lists a little bit more in Canada because we actually end up with a little more time to do so. But for some reason, we don't. I don't know why that is. If it were up to me, we probably would do a little bit more. But nevertheless, the dancers in Canada are just as stressed out, I think, as some of the other people are. And I just go across the countryside just making everybody happy. That's my thing. Is there any questions? Sorry, I'm sorry I was late again. I had a double booking. Yes.
Can you give an example of words or something that you use that makes it a little bit simpler than people normally do? What's you? You're doing a call. How do you make it more simple than other people do?
Repeat the question.
How do I make a call more simple?
In other words, more understandable. You say you do that, you make it easier for the dancers. Can you give an example?
Well, 9 times out of 10, the lead up to if I'm going towards someplace with something, especially for example, I do a sequence. The only one I can think of right now, there's hundreds of them, I imagine, but a lot of times when I have lines of 4, my ultimate goal is to have each box of 4 from a line of 4 that is in a split situation do the centers part of the load the boat. So they would do a pass out, partner trade, and pass through. So to lead up to that, I would start by saying each side, right and left through, each side pass the ocean, each side recycle, each side touch a quarter, each side walk and dodge, each side partner trade, each side pass the sea, each side switch the wave, each side turn and deal, each side pass in, each side touch a quarter, each side counter rotate, each side quarter through, each side explode, and each side pass through, each side chase right, each side, and then I'd say each side do the center part of load the boat. And they still break down. They still break down, but I expect them to, and it's usually the setup is so that after the load the boat, the center part of load the boat's an Alaman left. It's like a one call get out, and because they all start to kind of giggle because they know something's up. Obviously, at that point, they know something's up, something's coming, and because every call to that point has been relatively simple, relatively straightforward, and I keep saying each side. Then you call each side, do the centers part of a load the boat, and they all go down and they look at you, kind of giggle, and they know that they did it wrong. And the next time you call it, you don't have to walk them; they'll get it. You don't have to proceed it with all that stuff, and that's pretty consistent because they've had a second to think about it a little bit more, and it's actually fun for me to watch them figure it out by themselves. I have called the groups where they never did figure it out, and I just left it. I just went away from it, and did my own thing. But that's the kind of thing that I would do, and that's all. That's experience, actually. I mean, I have gone to places where I just called stuff thinking that they would just know how to do it. And it didn't work out very well. And there's no escaping that. When something goes bad and you just expected them to be able to do it, you have to go back and do it again for them and walk them through. But I'm not the type of caller that likes to, especially at open dances, to stop and walk people through stuff. I'd rather try to get them to dance through it once or twice. Even if they don't understand what they did, I try to make the choreography so that it's like a default choreography. They just end up falling into it. For example, let's say ocean waves, and you've got boxes, and working on a trail off. If you have the boys in the middle of the wave and the girls on the ends, a trail off leaves you in a tidal two-phase line-ish thing, majigger, and I'll say, everybody to the right, trail off, and they'll all muddle around and say, girls wheel and deal to face each other. And because they're moving to the center position, they'll have a two-face line for a brief moment. Some of them won't even get to a two-face line, but almost all of them get to some sort of a wheel and deal so that they're facing. And if they don't get that, I would never call that unless I had been working trail off for the evening as well. But there's always the little things that you can help them with. It all depends on the people too, I would never call that an open floor without taking a lot of time to talk about trail offs with people. From that position's not so bad as like a two-face line position. I would never call that, because without doing an actual workshop on it, because they would just crucify me. They would absolutely crucify me. They start throwing things at the stage probably. That is tough stuff, but that's the type of thing I do. It's pre-thought, even though sometimes it doesn't look like it's pre-thought. It really is. I do know what's hard, and I do know what's not hard, and I have thought it through in all cases, and I have a pretty good idea of what's funny and what is not funny. You can break people down sometimes, like the each side, and each side load the boat. That's funny once. It's not funny the second time. So you just have to keep. You get a little humor is fine. At this level, a little humor is good. A lot of humor is really bad, really bad. Tom. Yes, you in the front.
On the percolate where you had the people stopping the ocean wave.
John, why don't you let these microphones?
I'm John Hughes. On the percolate, when you had the people stopping the ocean wave for their checkpoint, do you buy that as being when you go into C2, you have anything percolate as being the break point?
Now, I'm assuming your question is that do we stop after whatever action replaces the first circulate and the anything percolate? Is that right? Yeah, I still do, because I think there's a point where you need to break. All calls, particularly the big pattern calls, should have checkpoints in them. Someplace along the line where we can recognize that we've done this much of the call and that we can depart from there. I think in the Scoot and Plenty, obviously, it's when the parallel waves show up the first time. I think in a call like Chain Reaction, it's at that moment that we get the star and the mini waves on the outside. And at that point, then we can go on to the rest of the call. But I think it's always wise to establish that kind of break point within the call so that we can then go on. It's not a parts mentality of now we're going to replace this and do this and whatever. It's a success strategy for handling the call. And so I think anywhere along the line you need to establish those kind of points where we've agreed we've come this far, now let's agree to go the rest of the right way. So I think you always need to establish breakpoints in all kinds of calls, particularly the biggest pattern ones, because you really need those there. The fact that we've gone on to approach challenge dancing and now even advanced dancing with the ideas of replacing and interrupting parts of calls and actually breaking those patterns apart. When you teach square through beginner lessons, you see those dancers out there and they dutifully pull by and they quarter in and they pull by and they quarter in, and 37 square throughs later, it's suddenly this little right-left grand on the inside, and it's lost all aspects of being square. That's because the call took a life of its own, and it's now something very different than the sum of its parts with the pull-bys and the quarters ins. So we teach a big pattern call like Scoot and Plenty, and we go, and they finally learn that pattern, and now we start to go back and mess with it. And suddenly we're breaking apart everything we just built up in creating that pattern or call. Unless somewhere along the line we give them a break point where they've built in a stop.
And we can be conscientious enough in how we build in the breakpoint so that it's the place that we normally interrupt or replace. And now we've built in a subtle little virus into their program where we can stop them without interrupting the call process for them. We can actually hit the breakpoint, which they accept now as a natural point of doing the call, and we can mess around with the interrupts and the replaces and so forth without them losing track of what call they're doing. You know, what happens the first time when you replace a part of the call? And if it's a long replacement that has no similarity to what the original part was, suddenly they're going, well, what the heck am I doing? And where are they going? Can they reevaluate? And suddenly you've made the problem that much harder to handle. And it's creeping in across the board. We're messing with all kinds of calls, not just C1 calls, but advanced calls and mainstream plus calls where we're replacing and taking away parts and changing things for the dancers. Now, that's less confusing because we're not creating new calls. We're not giving out a whole bunch of new call names like we used to. But we're still confusing the issue for the dancer on the floor. They don't think like we do. And so once we understand that we might be able to figure out a better way to communicate with them. Kip in this morning's session pointed out about how he doesn't use humor overseas as much. You know, he when he goes to Japan, he does the head square 3-4 do-sa-do was sexy. Well, it's nobody understands what he's talking about because all they speak is the square dance language. When I went to Sweden, I didn't use the normal humorous comments that I normally do. But what I did is that if I have jokes in the material, like people having confusion over how they did zigzag or how they did this or how they did that, and let the humor that's innate in the material make the situation that might make them relax, then I've used the language that they know how to communicate with. But we got to understand how they communicate and how they understand things and work within their language. When I went over there, one thing that I had to do is that the extraneous English words that we use in all of our calling suddenly become a foreign call over there. And so when I wanted the four people in the middle to work, I said it the same way every single time. And eventually, now the vast, great number of people in Sweden speak English, but or at least acquainted enough with enough English so they can function with you. But if I use it the same way every time, suddenly it becomes another little square dance call. So only the boys, only the girls, only the centers, only the ends, and I said it only. I didn't suddenly start creeping in the word just the centers or just the boys, or I used it one way every time. And yeah, the first few times were a little rough, but from then on, the floor understood. And I succeeded in communicating. So I think we always need to build in checkpoints in the calls, particularly now what we do with them in modern choreography. You have any other questions or comments? Would you like to comment on what I just commented on?
No, I think you're right, Mike. In Sweden, most of the dancers know English. And all of them know, like you say, the square dance type of English, you know, those little hints and tips you give to the dancers when they're dancing. But there are some that don't know a word of English. My mom and dad have never learned English. You know, for the young people, we have English from 3rd grade now. So we know some. But the older people, they don't know nothing, but they know square dance English, so they can dance. And we dance in English. It's no Swedish. And we teach in Swedish. We explain some of the calls in Swedish. But I try, when I get up on Advanced and Challenge, I try to teach in English too, both Swedish and English. They get used to take instructions from overseas callers.
I noticed that when I was in Germany that there's a large number of Germans that speak no English whatsoever that are square dancing and doing the challenge levels and advanced levels, and they're just learning a different language. But we got to play fair. We got to communicate in the language that we work with. And so often, many times when we start to approach the outer limits of whatever level we're doing, whether it's advanced or challenge, when we start to push the envelope, that's when we stop playing fair with the dancers. You know, the idea of going off the list to do calls, that's not playing by the rules of the game. Well, but we can also do that even though we're paying lip service to the list. Sometimes we approach it from such an angle that we're not really playing fair with the dancers there. It's one thing to expect them to function in right-hand waves, left-hand waves, so forth with motivates. It's another thing to suddenly throw in the concept of doing a motivate from a two-face line and pummeling them with it. It's one thing to introduce in the concept of expanding your horizons in the concept of a workshop. It's another thing to go out there and on a festival level floor and unconsciously call it to those dancers and expect them to do it and function. No matter how well you cue,
it's not a learning experience. They just simply function to your cueing. And we're not playing, if the idea of the game is that we're giving them a puzzle as well as movement to the music and sociability, we got to make the puzzle solvable. You know, it's one thing if we set up a trivia question that says, well, can you name all the people that won back-to-back baseball MVPs? And that unless you're really into baseball, that doesn't sound like a question you really want to answer. But if I tell you that there are 9 of them and they fill up each spot on the baseball diamond, then you got a shot at trying to figure out, well, maybe that could be somebody here that I know and somebody there I know, and it makes it a more interesting question to answer. What Tim did with his entertainment factor is that suddenly it starts to become an entertaining question. It starts becoming a question that perhaps I might want to solve this puzzle and put forth the effort to go ahead and do it, as opposed to being overwhelmed by it from the very beginning. And that's playing fair.
Should I have a comment?
I think you should.
You guys did another time. Does everybody here, when you guys give a piece of choreography, or you obviously all have some ideas about some neat choreography that you like to use, something new every night perhaps that you come up with when you go to call, or if you call every week, when you call to these people, do you tell them that it's new choreography? Do you communicate with them? Do you tell them that, let's try this? Do you do anything like that? Does anybody ever tell them? Do you get excited when they get it right? So, what do you say to them? How do you talk to them?
Good job.
Just good job, you know? Yeah.
Depends on the group. There's some groups where I'll let them know, hey, this is something new. Let's give it a fly. They'll go through it. Good, you got it. Or, hey, I'm glad that worked. You know, something we work together to make this work. I've done that with my beginners classes all the way through my A2 classes.
Now, I think that pays big. I really do. I really think that pays huge, because it's like it suddenly becomes a team sport to the dancers. So, John?
Along that line, I like a trigger word once in a while that I think will equalize or blend out. I like the word share. You know, a new call or a new way of using a call, or here's an idea that I like to share with you. Let's take this together and see what we can do with it. See what you can think of it. And all of a sudden, it's an easy situation. Mm-hmm. Or there's something to do for.
Yeah, the word, like, for John uses the word share for the tape. Not for the tape, for the dancers. He uses the word share. And I think anything that you communicate other than the calls to people is great. And I really do believe that it makes them more at ease, especially the newer dancer that comes into the new person who's attacking the C1 or C2. Those people are big time stressed out. Those are the people who usually ask your permission to dance at your club as opposed to just showing up. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are some people who show up even if you were not going to give them their permission. You all have them. They're in every club. We call them in our club, and we call them the Terminators. They there every week. Just they never miss a dance, which is. Even when we moved the location, forgot to tell them they found us. So they're allowed to come, but they're great people. Actually, I'm not. But we have them in every group, every single group, and. But you know, you do need to talk to those people who are new or the people who are struggling. Those are the ones that are hearing you when you say something other than the choreography. And those are the ones that they become sometimes the strongest link, or certainly in my case, they become the strongest part of the club. There are people who can dance wonderfully. I'm very fortunate to have a great group of people in both my A2 and my C1 clubs, and they are just wonderful to dance. There are people there who have been dancing C1 for a lot of years and pretty much know me pretty well. They know the choreography pretty well. They know the calls pretty well. I can still surprise them perhaps once in a while, but for the most part they do well. Then there's a core group. The core group are the people who, you know, generally I'm calling just on the outside of their ability. And those are the people that I love to call to. Those are the people that I talk to, and I spend a lot of time with them, you know, at the breaks going down and talking with them and helping them, you know, clean up the blood off the floor in some cases. You know, because they are working hard. They are really working hard, and those are the people that give me the biggest payback as well. And I talk to those people a lot. And then we got the other group of people who, you know, probably don't hear very much that you say at all. You know, when you generally speaking, because maybe they have an interpretation problem. You know, I've only ever called in Europe once, and my style of calling, you know, I had to fall right back on raw talent. So I have never been back. But essentially, I'd fall back right on call and just call. It was great, actually. It was kind of neat for me. It was totally out of character for me. You know, all I could do is have a big smile on my face and call. And it was great. It really was neat. You know, because at home, because you can get people through a lot more in your native tongue because they understand the words, now watch, or I want to share this with you. Or you can get their attention real quickly, but I found especially in Europe, I couldn't do that because they didn't understand a lot of the stuff I would say. You know, like, be careful. I'm sure that they most of them looked at me, smiling, just like that third group I discussed in my home clubs. They just looked at me.
I've got to share an experience that I had a number of years ago. I was calling at the National Challenge Convention, and there's a C3 concept called stable. Just the idea of the word stable, you know, it brings up this psychiatric type approach or whatever. So I decided, just as a little trick or whatever, I would have the boys be stable and the girls be paranoid. They do the call and turn around. It's a nice little joke. That was wonderful, except for the square Japanese dancers who didn't understand anything about paranoid, but certainly were acting that way. Looking around them, trying to check out to see if anybody else was moving when I announced that they were paranoid. So it's a matter of communication, and it's a matter of playing fair with whoever is out on the floor, no matter whether they speak English or not. Do we have any other questions or comments? If not, the challenge meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m. And, of course, the Advanced Committee is also meeting tomorrow, too. So thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you didn't get a copy of the handouts, we'll be getting copies to George, and I'm sure you can get the home office to get you a copy as well. Thank you.